100% of all rapes are caused by rapists. You know, it was nothing to do with the alcohol I drank that night, the clothes I was wearing. It came down to the fact that these two men decided to rape me and nothing else. Hi, my name is Madeleine Black. I am an author, a psychotherapist, a podcast host, and I guess a sexual violence activist. I am here to answer questions around my own experience of rape and trauma. What gave you the courage to come forward and speak about your experience? I would say that my courage came from other people sharing their story. You know, I heard someone else speak and I thought if they could do it, then I could do that too. And I just really intend to pay that forward by sharing my own story. How did your parents react to you telling this story publicly? Well, to start with, my dad is no longer here, so he doesn't know that I shared my story publicly. When I decided to share my story, it was about 7 years ago now, I told my family that I was going to do this. It was with an organisation called the Forgiveness Project, and I said to them, would they like to read what I have written, or would they just like to wait till it goes public on social media? And some of them decided to read it, some of them decided to wait to social media, and they were okay, you know. My mum has her own story of sexual violence as well, so I guess she was quite apprehensive, but I really believe in the power of sharing stories. And even though my mum was married to my dad for 38 years, he never ever knew about her own story, and she has been able to share it since I've shared my story. So it just it was my evidence that I needed, that there's great power in sharing our stories. What do you want young women in particular to learn from you? I really share my story, I guess, to end the shame, the stigma and the silence, because the shame is what kept me quiet for years. You know, the shame lied to me. It told me I was this worthless, less than person because what had happened to me. I used to think if people knew what had happened to me, they would look at me differently, wouldn't want to know me, because, you know, the impact of being raped and the trauma just left me feeling so worthless, so less than. So I guess I want women to see that you can move forward after rape. You know, there is life after rape. It's really possible to heal and have a good life. As a man, I've heard friends make rape jokes. How do I bring them up on it? When you hear a rape joke, it's part of rape culture. You know, men think that it's funny to be making jokes about women, their bodies, rape, but it's really all part of rape culture. And if we are silent, it's just as bad as listening to somebody make these jokes. So it's on all of us. It's not just up to women to call out these men. It's up to men to call out their friends as well. And yes, it might not be comfortable, but it's about what's right really at the end of the day. If you laugh along with them, I think you're just as bad as the person making the joke. What breeds rape culture is the way that women are viewed in society, that we aren't equal. We don't have equal rights. We don't have equal pay. We're not allowed to make decisions over our bodies. You know, men, it's a patriarchal society. The way that we portray women, demonize women, you know, sexualize women in advertising, in music, in films, the way we portray women in general, yeah, it just breeds all of rape culture. We have presidents telling women that you can grab them by the pussy. So, you know, if you have a president of this huge, powerful country, what kind of message is that to women? So it's prevalent everywhere, but the more we call it out, the more we disrupt rape culture, that's the only way we're going to end it. What was your relationship with your body and sex like after being raped? Well, I have worked as a counsellor, psychotherapist for many years. I worked at Rape Crisis for years and Women's Aid, and I know there's many, many, many ways that a woman can respond to being raped. But for me, I hid my body. I wore black for years. I cut my hair really, really short. I tried not to look, I guess, as feminine or attractive as possible, because somebody once said to me, when they found out that I was raped at 13, well, you must have been very attractive at that age. And that just made me, again, whether they were aware or not, that's rape culture, that it was my fault for being an attractive young teenager. So I hid myself for years, and my relationship with my body wasn't good. I developed anorexia. I used drugs and alcohol, really to numb out, to forget everything that had happened. But we don't really forget what happened, we just numb out, which is also a feeling. So for a long time, I just felt, I guess, like I was in the deep freeze. I became very promiscuous, which I know is another side effect that is quite common. If a guy tried it on, I just thought, well, I didn't want it to get violent like the very first time. I was scared, so I just let them do whatever they wanted. And then I developed a name for myself, so then that just brought on more attention. So it wasn't a great stage in my life. It was very dark, those early years after the first trauma. Have you been subject to victim blaming, and if so, how did you deal with it? Yeah, it's interesting because it's only now, looking back, that I realise certain comments were victim blaming. As I've just answered in that last question, well, you must have been very attractive. Now I know that 100% of all rapes are caused by rapists. You know, it was nothing to do with the alcohol I drank that night, the clothes I was wearing. It came down to the fact that these two men decided to rape me and nothing else. So now I will call out victim blaming wherever I see it. If it's on social media, if I hear it, I will just call it out and shut it down straight away. There was a case in Ireland maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and the judge herself said to the victim, well, you were wearing lacy thongs, you know, and thongs, if you'd got down to your thongs, he's taken off your clothes. And what happened afterwards in Ireland was there was a massive demonstration of all women waving their underwear with signs saying, you know, this is not an invitation to rape me, underwear does not cause rape. So if we're hearing that from the mouths of judges, you know, what message does that send to victims that are thinking, I'm going to take my perpetrator to court, I'm going to try and press charges? It would completely put you off. You know, you hear so many ways that women are portrayed that, well, she was out drinking, she was walking home, it was dark. But we know that babies are raped. We know that loads of rapes take place within marriages, so you're not even safe in your home. So if we put the blame on women, we're never going to really solve the issue. With obviously all the recent cases that have happened in the press, Sarah Everard and Sabina Ness, you know, they say, well, we'll get better lighting, we'll get more policing, but it's not an issue about safety. It's not, you know, we don't need better lighting. That's going to make no difference at all. The issue is male violence against women, and that's all it is. What do you do, or what would you say to someone who denies that our society has a problem with rape culture? As a woman, I don't think I know one friend that hasn't experienced some form of sexual harassment, some form of flashing, some groping. You know, the spectrum is huge to full-blown rape. I know that I was gang raped when I was 13, and I was raped 3 more times before the age of 18, and I never reported any of those. It is one of the most underreported crimes. I think maybe 20% of all crimes are reported, which makes me wonder what are the other 80% doing. And of all crimes that make it to court, I think it's now something like 1% will end in conviction. So it's almost as if rape has been decriminalised by the justice system. Whether you know it or not, you will know someone that has been raped or sexually assaulted. They may just not have come forward yet. And if that's the attitude that you have, they won't come forward to you anyway. How can I learn to forgive a person that I despise for what they did to me? When my eldest daughter, Anna, became 13, I was studying psychotherapy, I was doing a ton load of personal development, and her age just triggered all of my memories. So I was just flooded with pictures and nightmares and body sensations, and everything came rushing back. So I went for therapy, the last time I went for therapy, which lasted about 3 years. And near to the end, he just said to me one day, my therapist, you know, maybe these guys weren't born rapists. And at first, I was just so angry with him. I couldn't believe that he could say this to me, but he did plant a seed in my head, and it started to grow and grow. And I just found myself wanting or needing to understand, you know, how could 2 young men who weren't much older than me, they're maybe like 17, 18, how did they know to be so violent to another human being? How could they humiliate someone to such a degree that they had no regard for me in any way? And that's when I felt this compassion in my heart towards him, which is kind of seems a bit of a contrasting thing to say, but I realised, I've lived my life really, really well, and I've healed, and I think now I've grown through what I've gone through. I feel like I have post-traumatic growth, if anything, but they have to live with what they did to me, and I don't think that would be easy. And the idea of forgiveness it literally popped into my head, and I thought, just to take this one step further, I could choose to forgive them, just to really make peace for myself, peace in my own life. So forgiveness it wasn't something I chose to do. It was kind of, I guess, an organic part of my healing process. But I guess if you want to forgive, you have to look at what's stopping you from forgiving. Because for me, holding on to all that anger and resentment was just harming me. They had no idea, and letting it go, it just brought me peace. And it's much easier living my life from a peaceful place. What needs to be done to ensure victims and survivors of sexual violence can feel safe and supported when coming forwards? I'm a patron for a couple of organisations, or 3 organisations. One of them is called Justice Is Now, and they look at training judges and lawyers within the court system, because there's so much bias. We talked about rape culture and victim blaming, and we can't be naive to think that a jury comes into a courtroom and don't come in with preconceived ideas. They'll be thinking, well, she went up to his hotel room, or she had a drink with him, or she met him on a date. What was she thinking? But we just need to change the systems, because we know that there's such a small rate of conviction that most people wouldn't bother reporting what happened to them. And that's so sad. Why should perpetrators, I guess, get away with it? Because the system lets victims down so badly. You wonder, when there is a rape case, that who really is on trial. A woman's clothing will be taken away, her mobile phone will be surrendered for 2-3 years, her sexual history can be brought up, her past partners, she's just a witness in this trial. It can be really traumatising to be a witness in your own rape trial. Women do not get a good service going through the justice system, so it needs a major shake-up, and it needs society to listen to women, to really understand and to believe what they're saying. People will say, oh, she's made that up, I don't believe it. Believe me, if I could make up anything, I would not choose to make this up. I would choose something fantastic had happened in my life. I would not want to make this up. How do you feel Sarah Everard's murder has changed society's acknowledgement of sexual and gender-based violence? I think actually Sarah Everard's rape and murder really woke people up to what women have to go through. We've seen it with #MeToo, that there's kind of safety in numbers. When one woman speaks out and shares her story, it gives other people permission to share their story. And we saw how women were treated in the demonstrations. It was just women with flowers, and how heavy-handed women who were complaining about police's violence against women, and then they were met with violence in their demonstration, which on the whole I think was a peaceful demonstration. So there's so many questions that I actually don't have the answers to, because it needs a major shift in our culture, in our mindset, in our education, in our justice system, in the way young men are brought up, in the way young women are brought up. It's a big question. What could be added to the school curriculum to prevent gender-based violence? I used to think it was all about education, about training events, raising awareness, but it's a huge picture that is going to take much more than education. But I think what we can include in education is to really teach young children from a really, really young age about consent. And consent is not just about sexual consent. Consent is about relationships, healthy relationships, about respect. When I was little, forced to go and give an older relative a kiss, whether you wanted to or not. We need to ask, is it okay? Would you like to go and give your uncle whatever a kiss? Or being forced to sit on Santa's knee, all of these things, there's no consent. So consent is so important. I didn't realise till many, many years later that I had been raped 3 more times after the main rape, as I call it. It was only then when I realised they wanted something from me. I said no, and they carried on afterwards, that there was no consent there at all. And it took me till I was actually in my 50s that I thought, well, that was rape too. I just thought I'd put it down to that I had a lot of bad sex, and it was just the after effect of what had happened to me. It was in my very promiscuous days, but I realised now there was never any consent. So I hope, if anything, that consent is always on the agenda and young people really learn to respect each other. Just if anyone's listening right now and they are struggling, they have maybe experienced rape, violence, sexual violence, childhood sexual abuse, just know it's never too late to find your voice, to go and get support, to go and get help. You don't need to go through this alone. Thank you all for your questions. I love questions. I think it's the only way that we really get to hear different opinions, and I just love where the questions come from. So I'm grateful for all the questions. And if anybody wants to find out more about me, just go to my website, madelineblack.co.uk.